Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Use the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you've tuned into Booklarder chats before, you are familiar with this drill because I love to know where people are tuning in from. I'm in Seattle, San Diego, Queens. Hello. We'll let a few more people get tuned in and then we'll get started. New Jersey, hello. All right, Seattle, where are you? Madison Valley, thank you very much. Chicago, Seattle, Ames, Iowa, hello. Dubai, wow, welcome. It's one of the cool things about doing the events this way, right? When would someone from Dubai have been able to come to a Booklarder Author Talk? Seattle, Fremont. All right. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started then. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Hamilton. I have a cookbook shop here in Seattle, Washington called Booklarder. We had started to do some in-person author talks again, and now we're slowing that down again and continuing to do author talks on Zoom. The wonderful part about that, though, is that we can do a talk like tonight where we can do sort of a panel discussion with authors and creators who are all over the place and with you who can join us from literally all over the world. So thank you very much for being here. I am really delighted tonight to welcome Priyanka Naik. She is a TV host and a Food Network champion and now an author. She has written this really magnificent book called Modern TIFFIN. She is going to be in conversation tonight with a couple of other really fantastic vegan authors and creators. First, Joanne Molinaro, who is obviously Korean vegan all over social media, and now also a best-selling author. Her Korean vegan cookbook has sold so well that I actually do not have a copy of it here with me to show the cover of. And because the one I had at home, I gave to someone who really wanted it as a Christmas gift for her daughter. So we will be stocking those again shortly. I will drop links to both Priyanka's book and Joanne's book in the chat if you are interested in picking those up. They are going to be joined in conversation by Chef John Kung, who is joining us from Detroit. He is also a video creator and also about to be a cookbook author, working on a book himself. The three of them are going to talk about food, of course. They're going to talk about Priyanka's book. They will leave time for questions. So please, if you have any, just use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of those as possible. You can support the talk by purchasing a copy of the book from Booklarder. And of course, as I said, I will drop a link in the chat. We are also recording the talk tonight. And so if you have to drop off early or you want to watch it again, you want to share it with friends, it will be up on our YouTube channel, the Booklarder YouTube channel, within the next 48 hours or so. All right, enough housekeeping. Let's welcome Priyanka Naik, Joanne Molinaro, and John Kung.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Exciting. Thank you so much for being a part of my talk today.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And thank you to the Booklarder for hosting this incredible event and this chat, and for being so flexible about making it a virtual event so that we can have more people from everywhere, including places like Dubai, join in this conversation. And also, I could not let this go, but I think, John, the sign is that you have to be vegan now.
I know. I was like, oh, well, I mean, I'm sadly not a vegan, but I am a big fan. Yes, big fan.
And he is a wonderful innovator when it comes to plant-based cuisine. That's no problem, Laura. I think it was wonderful that you made that statement. But this is actually about Priyanka and her absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, innovative book. And I really wanted to start this conversation by asking sort of a broad question. You've now been a published author for a couple of months because your book came out earlier last year. So it's not like you just came out with a book yesterday. And now that you've had a few months for this whole process to settle in, What are some of the things that have come up as a published author that maybe you didn't expect? I mean, we all kind of go into this with sort of preconceived notions of what it's going to be like when I'm a published author. What are some of the things that have happened over the past couple of months that maybe were a little surprising to you?
That's a great question. I think something that I never really understood before, going on this endeavor of writing my own book and then getting it published is why everyone always revered authors. Like even growing up, it was always like, so and so is this and that and an author. And it's always like the author portion of someone's title or that accomplishment was always so much more revered than others, at least from my perspective. And I was always like, why is it like, okay, so who cares if they're an author, right? Like, why is that such a big deal? And it wasn't until I went through my own process, as you all have and are, of writing my own book and thinking through what the book is actually going to be about and pitching myself to agents and finally getting an agent and then a publisher and finally getting a publisher after a lot of rejection, actually. And I think everyone's paths are very different. So after all of that, and then finally writing it and not actually having anything tangible in hand, right? Like everything is digital, everything's kind of a concept. And I think that's why every time first time authors especially receive their first book, they're crying. And I'm not a crier at all. Like I'm not emotional by any stretch of the imagination, but literally, and when my editor was like, Priyanka, you might get emotional when you get your book. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then I got my book and I was like, oh my God, like it's real. And I think that's one of the biggest feelings and experiences that I didn't really expect at all is the process in which you have to go through to actually write the book and bring it to life and what all of that feels like. I think the feeling aspect of it is something that I didn't really expect at all. And then since then, I think some of the more kind of realistic aspects or outcomes of becoming an author now only since November is, when my book came out, in my mind, I was like, oh, it's going to be amazing. It's going to get on every list. It's going to do this. And it didn't necessarily, it's still working its way up there, right? I'm not a New York Times bestseller just yet, Joanne. I'm not you just yet, but like, I think that's what I had to come to terms with. And also speaking to some of my mentors is that cookbooks are very evergreen, right? They never go out of style. They're always valuable in the kitchen. And even if, someone's not buying my book today, this instance, they might get it in 6 months or 6 years, right? And I think that's the beauty of writing a book, and especially something that is very close to my craft.
I just wanted to follow up on that because there was so much packed into that really incredible and very transparent answer. And one of the things that we all know about you is your incredible career. And you've done it in a very short period of time. You've been on the Food Network. You are a self-taught chef, basically. And now you have a gorgeous cookbook to add to your credentials. And I think what I'm hearing is that perhaps this book was an opportunity for you to be a little bit more intentional about what you were creating than perhaps you might have been on the Food Network or, being a champion on those types of things. When you look at that book, that physical manifestation of your intention, what is it from that book that leaps out to you as this is me? This is what I want people to get out of this book?
I think in order to answer that question, there's one visual that I have to show you from the book that I think will help answer that, because these are some of the things that I haven't been able to do on TV as much or on the Food Network or all of these kind of shows that I've been on. Is really, where can I find it? I should have probably bookmarked it.
That's okay. One of these days there's going to be dog ears on it.
Is this photo? So like this is in chapter 1. It's called the Maharashtrian TIFFIN chapter. So I am specifically Maharashtrian, which is, a region of India, Maharashtra, where Mumbai is in. And the style of cuisine we eat at home, the dishes we eat at home, you can't ever get in a restaurant in the US at least. And I don't know if you ever will. And the reason why I say this picture answers your question is because I couldn't necessarily make this type of food or present it in this way when I've been on TV or when I've developed recipes for brands or whatever else I've done, or even high-end private catering that I've done. And I wanted to use this as a vehicle, my book as a vehicle to share this part of my life with the world, essentially, that I may not have the opportunity to do in other forums.
You talked a little bit about your process, but like, tell me a little bit about your motivation. What was your initial desire that led you to writing a book in the first place?
You know, that's a great question. And I joke about this all the time because when I was little, my parents, who I think are watching, used to always yell at me because I don't like to read. And I have two older sisters who are avid readers and writers. Like they would read like a lot of books. And I was like Cliff's Notes, Spark Notes, like not really reading, like didn't want to go to the library. I just found it really boring. So the fact that I've written a book is hilarious in itself to my family because they're just like, you don't even read, like this is hilarious. I think the motivation though behind it was I've had a blog for several years now, and I started a blog to share recipes because when I became fully vegetarian and then vegan, I noticed that now times have changed, but 10 years ago, it was really different. Like even getting vegetarian food at restaurants was like a struggle. And in many states and countries, it still is. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to start a blog because I know how to cook. I've learned from my culture. So I'm going to put it out there. But then what I realized later is that part of putting that blog out there, I wrote really long, what I now known to be as head notes. And I was like, wait, I actually am telling like stories with these recipes. And I basically am writing on this blog, like the way I'm talking to you guys or anyone. And it occurred to me that I actually just as much as I like cooking and writing recipes, I actually like telling stories. And that's where the motivation of writing a book came, because I think this is the best, again, I'm using that word kind of like vehicle or vessel to house all of those stories, right? So someone can pick it up and actually read it and feel like they're talking to me. And then from a more like, I would say industry standpoint, because I'm self-taught, I think the motivation to write a book came for a desire to have more credibility in the space. It's been an uphill battle for me as someone who didn't go to culinary school, as someone who's Indian, as someone who's vegan, to gain credibility in the industry as someone who's an expert. And so I was like, well, I am an expert, and that's why I wrote a book, because I know what I'm talking about. So I would say those are I have very long-winded answers, guys, so I'm very sorry in advance. But that's kind of the reason why I wanted to write it.
Well, that's right. Did you have any difficulties like incorporating your veganism in with cultural foods?
Not for my specific culture, because, you know, most people here look at Indian food as very creamy and heavy, which it's mainly reflective of North Indian food or Punjabi food, which, don't get me wrong, it's really good. And, you know, we like to go out and eat that style of food, but it's not reflective of obviously all the different types of regional cuisines in India, just like China or Korea or any other country. Like food is so regional, and the type of depiction of that, you know, food or culture that we have here is very small, and it's usually Americanized. And most of the time it's like the colonized version of that country's food. And it's no fault to anyone, it's just the way it is. So for me, growing up, we actually were vegetarian, and most of our dishes were vegan, actually. And we didn't call it vegan, it was just, you know, these are the vegetables, and this is the chapati, like the bread, this is the rice, this is the dal. Like it was just you're eating, right? And it's very filling. There's tons of protein, there's tons of fiber. There was never a question of like, where are you getting your protein or where are you getting your nutrients? So for me, it was really easy because I grew up eating like all sorts of vegetables under the sun, which is why I still, well, John, you actually brought this up on Twitter the other day about buying ginger at a tiny grocery store. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I talk to my parents all the time about like, I go to the Patel cash and carry or the Little India market to get my vegetables, because like, I can't find half the things in, you know, an American grocery store.
So Priyanka, I think one of the things that is so beautiful about your book is sort of that kind of willingness to just put it out there. This is the kind of stuff that I wouldn't have necessarily been able to share elsewhere. So I'm going to put it in my book. Maybe for those of us who are maybe less familiar with this type of cuisine, could you maybe explain to us what you wanted to get across by the title, Modern Tiffin?
Yeah, so, well, for those of you who don't know what a tiffin is, I actually have two varieties here. We have one, which is a fancier gold variety, which I was actually sent. So my mom did not get me this. The one my mom gave me is right over there. But this is a tiffin, and it's a steel stacked container set, and then it's latched and you can carry it. So it's essentially a lunchbox. And this tradition is about, like, I believe it's about 150 years old, actually. And it's still very popular in India. And basically the concept is, like, in India, regardless of your socioeconomic status, most of the time families and people are focusing their day around food, and every meal is a fresh meal. And basically, and I don't agree with this part, so we're gonna just pretend these details are more progressive now, but like the man would go to work, and at home there would be like the mom or the sister or the grandma or whomever, and they would cook a fresh meal. They would pack it up into the tiffin. The tiffin wallas, which are tiffin delivery guys, would come around, pick up the tiffins and bike it downtown to where everyone was working and deliver it. So then people have a fresh lunch. Now, the reason why it's relevant for me is because I grew up on Staten Island, New York, which is a forgotten borough. Obviously, no one looks like us there. They're all, Italian generally. But we grew up there, and my mom packed me and my sisters lunch every day. Like, we never bought school lunch. It was usually we couldn't eat it half the time because it was like non-veg or just really not healthy. We packed lunch. It was usually Indian inspired, and it would have a fruity mango juice, which I don't know if you guys know Fruity, the brand. I don't even know if they still make it, but it's like green boxes with the mango on it. But we would have these lunches. And even after I graduated college and started going to work, I packed my lunch every day. And it just was kind of ingrained in me that cooking for yourself not only is much healthier, but it's therapeutic. It's more economically efficient because I'm not spending $15, $20 on lunch. And it's more accessible because, again, as a vegetarian or vegan, options were really limited. And it occurred to me that most people weren't doing that, especially in my generation. People weren't taking the time to cook for themselves. And I wanted to essentially modernize that concept and bring it to life and bring it to my generation and maybe even generations younger, to kind of emphasize the value in cooking for yourself, packing food for yourself, making things portable. And again, I'm not saying that you should take this book, make every recipe, stick it in a tiffin, and that's the way you need to eat it. No, but if you want to make it portable, you can. I just think there's a lot of value to it that maybe is not as prevalent in this part of the world than it is in some place like India.
Well, and I think that there are a lot of people who, especially with a new year, are resolving to, be a little bit more active in their home kitchen and be a little bit more mindful and intentional with how they prepare their foods or the foods that they eat. If you had to maybe distill 3 tips for the new, okay, this is my year where I'm going to start cooking more of my own meals, what would be the 3 best pieces of advice that you could give to somebody who might be a little bit intimidated about doing that?
I love this question. And if the question is like more broadly, less related to veganism, then I would say, irrespective of what your dietary choices are, like, please just explore the dry spices aisle in your grocery store. Like, you don't even need to go to, an ethnic or, foreign grocery store to do this. Like, even Whole Foods houses so many spices now. And I cannot emphasize this enough, that whole dried spices really take your food from bland to explosively flavorful. Like, you could literally just add cumin seeds to something and it's a whole new dish.
I have to interject here. We had Priyanka over to our Brooklyn Airbnb, and we were making, my traditional mandu, which is Korean dumplings. And she brought this beautiful tray of these whole dried spices, and exactly how she described, it took our dumplings to a complete other level when it came to flavorful explosion. And it was pretty remarkable. So I just needed to add that there.
I will say though, your dumplings at baseline were good. It's not like they needed anything, but I was just like, this is so fun. Like, let's just do it. And I think that's the point, right? Like a lot of these dry spices, first of all, they're inexpensive, most of them. They have long shelf life, and you could just use a little bit and saute it in with vegetables, rice. You could put it in meat marinades. Like it really will take your dish to another level. So that's like my first tip. My second tip is if you are trying to be more plant-based, and maybe John, this is a tip for you, since now you are designated vegan chef like us, is I always recommend people to kind of use each week as a new stepping stone to a new vegetable. So like one week you can focus on broccoli, and then there's so many variations of broccoli. There's broccoli rabe, there's regular broccoli. Like you can take a couple of one or two vegetables and think about different creative ways that you can cook with them throughout the week. And I love doing that because it also pushes our boundaries and thinking about that vegetable in particular. Like I know most people just like steam broccoli. Like I don't think I've ever had steamed broccoli in my life. We usually saute it or do something else with it. So it's like, what are all the different ways I can cook this vegetable? And I think like focusing on cabbage one week and radish the next week, I think it's a fun way to incorporate new vegetables in your daily lives. And the third thing is, and this is like something that I talk about in the Modern Tiffin, and something that's like a huge foundation for my cooking style, is I always recommend people to dismantle what I call Western perspective on a plate. And that is having a protein at the center, a carb on the side, and a vegetable on the side. This 3-segmented plate, to my knowledge, really does not exist outside of the States. And we certainly did not grow up eating like that. And I'm not saying there's one right or wrong, but when you dismantle that perspective, then literally your whole entire like horizon for cooking is a complete blank canvas. Like you could do whatever you want. You don't have to stick to like, well, I need that protein at the center. It's like, no, you could literally make 3 small dishes and eat it however you want. So those are my 3 tips.
I love that. And I just have to say at the end, Korean food is the same way. I mean, my husband is Italian American, and he very much sticks to that sort of model. And I'm like, why? Like, you got to put everything in your mouth at once. That's the best way to eat it. All the different flavors and textures. I usually have 7 small dishes around me and my little bowl of rice. But yeah, I love that.
So I am sitting and chatting with 2 published authors, and I'm currently in the process of writing my own book. And I am learning some things about myself. Latest thing, I've learned that I can actually be structured slowly. And this is something that I'm still getting used to. What is something that you learned about yourself over the course of writing this book? Because I'm sure you have.
That I'm a much better storyteller when it comes to writing than when it comes to speaking, because anyone who personally knows me, like I try to tell a story and they're like, Priyanka, we don't care about those details. I get to the point. And I'm like, but these details are important. Like I sat on the left side of the couch and this is what they're like, no, literally, like that's not, like they're bored after like I get through even like the first 2 minutes. And I think, but that style that's in my mind is much more conducive for writing, because when you write something and someone is reading it, it's almost like they want to be taken on that journey, right? So those details matter. It matters, what color the dish was, or the consistency or something, of the viscosity of something. Like those details, I think for cooking too, are so relevant, because I don't have pictures for every dish in my book. So people, for some of the recipes, do have to rely on the way I write about it. And that becomes very important. So that is something certainly that I learned about myself, and learned that it's actually a strength for me in writing, and maybe a weakness in like in social settings.
Also, you maintained your entire career and an entire work life while writing this book. Do you have any advice for anybody who might want to follow in your footsteps, and any advice on how they could achieve a kind of balance to maintain what it takes to write an entire book while having a career?
Well, I mean, it's funny because both of you had former careers as attorneys. So it's like, I am sitting amongst people who are very accomplished. And the one thing I can say to people is like, don't do what I'm doing unless you're like crazy and able to maintain your life. I think for me, it's more just, if I have to do something, like if I have a deadline, I'm gonna do it, right? Like I don't care like I'm kind of very introverted, even though people on social media think I'm not. I'm very much, I call myself a gremlin. Like I'm at home a lot, like doing my things and being my creepy gremlin self. But like I think that's conducive to me being able to maintain a career in tech and this culinary career and food media career. Obviously, if you have the option to not have to do that, don't do it, because I wish I could spend more time on my culinary career. The only reason why I'm doing that is because, until I'm completely financially stable and comfortable with the culinary side of my life, but also because I worked really hard for my tech career. So I don't want to, and I've talked to you guys both individually about this, but I don't want to just, throw it away and be like, all right, bye. So I think the key to being able to maintain both is managing your time really well. I'm not the type that's like, early bird gets the worm. No, I wake up late. Everyone knows that. Everyone makes fun of me. I wake up really late, but it's not about, oh, I'm waking up at 6 a.m. It's about, I'm waking up and what am I doing now, right? Like, what am I doing in this block of 2 hours versus like me waking up early and just being grumpy, right? So it's how effectively I use my time, and also like making sacrifices, right? Like I don't necessarily go to, every party I'm invited to or every social gathering because I have to finish the manuscript for my book. So for me, it's all about like thinking about the long-term goals and what you do in this moment and how it's going to affect that, 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line.
So one of the things that I think is so beautiful about your book, and you've mentioned this, is the storytelling aspect. And we absolutely get a sense of the nostalgia that sort of inveigles its way throughout the pages of this book. And even just the colors, just these bright, splashy colors that, really paint this picture of your childhood. But I think it would be very reductive to say, oh, no, this is a book about Indian American cuisine, because you've been all over the world. And I imagine your travels have informed your idea of, what belongs in a modern tiffin.
Yeah. So what's funny is you mentioned about the colorfulness of my book. I just have to say, when I saw your book, actually, it was so funny because I was like, oh my God, her book is so beautiful, but it's like the complete opposite of mine. But they're so cool, but so opposite, which it was so interesting to me, because if you guys haven't seen Joanne's book, you should look at it next to mine and see how different they are, but there's kind of so unique. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Literally. Yeah. They're so beautiful just individually. But anyway, I just had to mention that because I thought it was so funny, because both of us I know have very similar outlooks on food and culture, but the way we presented ourselves is so unique to us. But like, I have traveled quite a bit. I've traveled to nearly 40 countries, and I've been fortunate enough to travel quite a bit growing up with my family. And I think that really helped kind of put the travel bug in me. I mean, I grew up going to India, like practically every single year of my life. I learned my native language of Kannada before I learned English. And so I think my perspective on the world since a young age was probably more worldly than most, I would say, kids that I grew up with on Staten Island, especially. So when I became older, and actually for the past 5 or 6 years, I set a goal for myself that every year I like to travel to 2 to 3 new countries. Obviously, COVID has prevented that for the past 2 years. But before that, that was my goal. And I kind of found any which way to travel to those countries. If I had a friend living in that country, I'd go. But the reason why was not only to like get away and have fun, but when you travel to different countries, it allows you to actually experience the culture and the societal norms there. But it's really a great way to learn about that country's culture through food. So like eating out, going to the markets, like even getting a glimpse into their agriculture, and why does like a cucumber taste so different in India than it does in America? Or like, why is a lemon so much larger on the Amalfi Coast than it is here? And why is the taste so different? And I think being able to experience that and ask questions where you can it has really helped me expand my culinary perspective, and it's inspired like my entire like cooking repertoire. So that's why every chapter in this book is dedicated to a part of the country that I've been to and liked and really enjoyed and I found really tasty, which is also why Japan's not in this book, because I did go, but I had a lot of difficulty eating there as a vegan. So that's going to be reserved for another book down the line, because there's a few dishes that I ate that I love, but like every person's experience is so individual and you travel. And I really wanted to make sure that I captured that in this book and kind of took people on that journey with me.
That's amazing. I am very curious again, because you've been, out, your book has been out for a couple months now. And I imagine that you're hearing from a lot of people from both within your community, your existing community, and even outside of that community who probably feel, wow, I feel seen in a certain way, right? Whether it's because they're plant-based and, they've grappled with kind of cultural cuisine and cultural identity, or because, they're Indian American and they're a part of that diaspora, and seeing your book and your stories come to life in this way. What has been some of the more meaningful instances of communication that you've received from those people who've been reading your book?
I think this is a good question, because I think when I wrote the book and put it out there, my thinking was like, well, people will buy it for the recipes and wanting to learn about and especially because veganism is really booming now. It's like people are going to want it to look to it for ideas. I think what I discounted though was that it's not actually just about the recipes. People are actually focusing on the stories, and that was interesting to me because, well, it made me a little bit nervous because I was like, wait, am I a good writer? Like, did I write well? like, is there anything like, I don't know, stupid in there? Like, obviously we read these over and over again, but you just get paranoid. So there was that first reaction, but reading some of the reviews, not only from like, different publications and editorial reviews, but even just Amazon reviews, right? Of people writing reviews about my book. A lot of the times they're focusing not just on the food, but like, I loved your story about growing up in an environment that didn't necessarily look like you, but like your parents and your mom taught you so much. And I'm like, oh my God, like people are actually reading it. And it really, like, that's, I guess, what has made me the most joyful in being able to publish this book, is that I don't know if I would be able to tell those stories if I didn't have this out there, right? Like, I think it's really important, especially for people like us who are of different backgrounds, to try to get more and more of those stories out there. And also, like, for me in particular, most people look at Indian people and they're like, oh, you're all like doctors and lawyers and engineers, or you're in tech. Well, I am in tech, but like, there's not as many of us that are like, oh, known as chefs or authors or cooks or, on TV. And it's not that I'm doing this to stand out, but it's like, this is the part of my life that I like and I love. And I think it's important for me to be able to use my platform to share those stories. So I think like, it's not even one specific instance. It's everything that I've been reading, but even like, Chef Kat Cora like has my book and like messaged me about my book. And if you guys don't know her, she's like an Iron Chef. She's the first female Iron Chef. Like, I really looked up to her like growing up and watching Food Network. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, I never in my life thought I would be able to send Kat Cora my book and she would actually read it and message me about it. Right? Like, that's just like, psh.
Wow, amazing.
One thing the three of us have in common is that we're all actually like creators on like respective social media accounts, like Instagram and TikTok and whatnot. How has being on social media affected your overall trajectory, like as an author or as a creator in general?
So this is interesting for me because when I started my blog now 10 years ago, I actually used Twitter as the platform, which I work at Twitter now, which is a whole funny full circle kind of moment. But I used Twitter as my main platform because that was the only like publicly available social media platform. Instagram really wasn't as like booming then. And I would like write my recipes on my blog and then put it on Twitter, and I would like tag a brand, and I'm like, hey, Sabra Hummus, like, you know, made this recipe. And they'd be like, oh my God, and then retweet it and engage with it. And I'm like, oh my God, everyone knows me. And then like fast forward to today, it's just like insane what's happened with social media, right? It's just like, it's not just, oh, you could tag a brand and then notice you. It's like, you really gotta like put the work in, as we all do. And I think the one thing social media has done for me is it's given me a platform to really showcase my kind of video and on-screen talent, which we might not have formally had before, right? Like, I obviously love being on camera, I love being on TV. And I think like before it was just very traditional. You would have to audition, you would have to go to casting calls, you would have to like really try to like get on TV in some way. And you didn't really have these platforms besides YouTube, right? To like really showcase like your chops. And I think social media has given us, and especially someone like me, that platform to do it in a mass scale way. And I think it's really helped me garner, and I would say like all of us, right? Like garner the attention that I think we, in many cases, rightfully deserve for like the type of, you know, food we're putting out there, the stories we're putting out there. So for me, it's been a total game changer. It actually has been more Instagram, less TikTok. And Instagram, I think, has really just like taken my career in the culinary world from like just me posting my random recipes online to like it's one of my careers now, which is like, it's weird. I never thought it would be.
Do you think possibly that you can take it even further onto new media? You said you enjoy being like a personality. Do you think like maybe there's like a YouTube show somewhere in the future?
Well, I hope there's a TV show somewhere in there in the future. I mean, I'm still like, I'm a little bit traditional in that sense, that linear TV to me, or what I consider like linear TV. So like even the Netflix and the streaming services, like that is like the biggest those are the biggest platforms you can be on. Like when I was just even on the Kelly Clarkson show, like the number of eyeballs that saw that, you can't necessarily sometimes get that with social, right? So I hope that in the future there is something there. But YouTube, I mean, YouTube is hard for me because, as you guys know, like you have to film horizontally and I film everything vertically, and I'm one person and I'm kind of like, oh, like I'm trying to do the YouTube shorts and stuff, which I do, but I'm definitely getting bigger on TikTok. So, you know, you guys will have to give me your tips later on that, since you both are like TikTok superstars. But I would say like my aim is definitely like a linear TV show down the line.
Well, let's talk about that, because I want to know what you have sort of on the horizon. Let's talk a little bit about that television show. Can you tell sort of everyone here that's listening, if you had Netflix sitting in a room with you right now and they said, "Hey, Priyanka, we love you so much. We will give you whatever show you want. You just tell us what it is." What would that show be?
So there's two concepts that I've had in the back of my mind. One is directly related to, let's say, something like the modern tiffin, where I would love to be able to travel to different parts of the world and experience the type of like vegetable forward food that they had to offer. Because people, first of all, not everyone gets the opportunity to travel. And I think people love aspirational content where they can vicariously live through someone. And I would love to be able to be that person to showcase that, right? Like I'm well-traveled already. I speak a bit of Spanish. I could maybe learn some other languages, and I would love to travel and maybe showcase those kind of like what Anthony Bourdain did, but maybe like not as meat focused and not as like just more girly and like fun and like
More you.
yeah, more me. But I think it's important, because I think that when you go to other countries, the type of produce and stuff they have there, it's just like there's so many things that are out there that we don't have here. And in fact, most cultures are so much more vegetable focused than we think. And I think being able to highlight that in a way to make it fun and to make it aspirational, I think would be great content. Plus, I think I'm kind of funny and goofy, so maybe like people would like watching that. But that's one of my concepts. The other concept would be more related to restaurants. So I don't know how you guys feel about this, so you could tell me, but people always ask me like, oh, so is your next step, like, are you opening a restaurant? And I'm like, like, I don't really want to dabble in restaurant operations. Like, not really, not really all that interested in that. Maybe if I have a bigger team one day. I do think there's a lot of satisfaction for like to see people eat your food, of course. And I think one day I would love to have that. But just right now, like when I see restaurants, I don't fully like the concept of it sometimes. I sometimes find it very restrictive. I find the operations of it to be really archaic in many ways. So I would maybe love to have some sort of show where we're able to create accessible vegetable or vegan forward restaurants in areas that you may not necessarily think of it. Like, I don't know, like I haven't fully thought this through, but like New York or in LA wouldn't be those, like, because we have obviously vegan restaurants here, like everywhere. But let's say in some place like, and I'm making this up and I haven't actually been here, which is funny. I've actually traveled less of America than I have the world, actually, which is, I don't know how that came about, but
I actually think a lot of world travelers, that is the case.
yeah, I don't know like why that it's actually pretty expensive to travel domestically, like when you look at tickets. But anyway, but if you take someplace like, I don't know, Oklahoma, right? I don't know like what their vegan scene is out there, or even like their cultural scene, right? Like, I don't know how many Indian people there are there, or like Asian people. I would love to go to a place like that and kind of expose them to me and like expose them to not only my culture, but vegan food. So, and I think that could be really interesting because it could be very eye-opening in terms of using things that already exist in that area and showing them how to make it in a different way. So those are kind of the two concepts that I've been thinking about, but we'll see what happens down the line.
Well, I have to say, I agree with the comments in the chat. I would watch those shows. So I hopefully there's a Netflix producer in the chat right now who's listening to these concepts.
Yo, get at me.
John, do you have any final questions before we move on to the Q&A?
Oh, I was just about to say that the chat box is open to receive questions, but before we go into that, do you have any thoughts or maybe aspirations for another book? And what would you put in it or do you have any plans to put anything in one?
I would love to write another book, and I certainly hope it doesn't end at one, because I think I'm probably more creative than I probably realized I am, which is another thing that I've learned through this process, which I'm sure both of you have learned as well. And I think for me, outside of just being vegan and Indian American and all that, my huge focus is sustainability. Just because, you know, you're vegan doesn't mean you're sustainable. And I think outside of just cooking, like, you know, I shop all sustainably. I like, even I'm like furnishing my new home and I'm talking to my parents and I'm like, I can only buy like, you know, a restored wood, like sustainable, like sofa. And I think it's really important for us to think about ways to be more sustainable from end to end in our lives. So I would love to focus my book around, at the minimum, sustainable cooking. And I love doing things like repurposing leftovers, which I used to do a series on that last year. I don't have time to do it right now, but repurposing leftovers, or things like how to use the whole of the produce. So like you have the beet tops and the beets, people usually just discard the tops, but they're very nutritious. They're really tasty. It's just a matter of knowing how to cook them. So I think there's so many different ways that we can incorporate more sustainable techniques in our day-to-day. So I hope to focus on that for my next book.
Oh, John, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I just said wonderful. And also, like, if there are any questions that people that are watching along would have, just go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll read them out to Priyanka.
Yeah, John, I think there are already 6 questions in the Q&A. Do you see them, or do you want me to read them?
I do not see them. I just see a chat box. Maybe that's why I'm just like,
There's a Q&A button on the bottom.
Well, why don't we, I'll read them off for now. Let's see. This is a good one. And I think you talked a little bit about this, but maybe if you could go into greater detail, because I think it is a question that's on many people's hearts right now. We're hearing about the great resignation in the news. How do you juggle your daytime job and your deep down passion of cooking? I am struggling with that now because I'm passionate for my 9 to 5 and when I went to school for, but also long to do something bigger with my Malay Indian culinary skills, especially with Malay being such a small food scene in the US. I don't know where to start. That's a mouthful that I think you're going to have to get around.
This is a good question. And I like this question because I could totally empathize with being passionate for your 9 to 5 because, and I think all of us here can empathize with that, right? We really work hard for that. And it's the same way why I still work in tech because I'm like, I worked really hard for this. I'm not trying to throw it away just now. But I think what helped me kind of set my boundaries is knowing how cooking made me feel, right? So when I finished my work's never finished. When I finished my work, I'd be like, okay, now I need to cook, right? And because I need to cook because I'm hungry and I want to eat dinner. So it kind of started from that standpoint. And cooking for me is incredibly therapeutic. I find it fun. I find it one of the few things you could do where you're not on your phone and you're focused on cutting and prepping and cooking and tasting. So because of the feeling that I got from it, I was like, this makes me happy without even me like trying very hard, right? And that's when you know that it's good for you, right? You're not like trying super hard at it. It comes very easily and it was accessible to me. And then I started taking photos of my dishes and just putting it on Instagram, putting it on my blog. And that's kind of where it started. And then I started to carve out more time for it. And that's kind of what I said earlier is it's not that you need to wake up at 6 a.m. and do all these things. It's how effectively are you using your time, right? So like if I'm allocating 2 hours of my day to Chef Priyanka, like I have a list of things that I'm doing in that 2 hours. I'm not just like willy-nilly. It's like I have to send these 50 emails and do this and that, right? Or last year I used Saturday as my content creation days. And I was like, okay, I need to do 3 recipes today, right? So I do need to wake up early because I need to do all of my recipes with daylight. So I think understanding how you feel about it, recognizing it, and then being able to carve out the time for it will actually really make a difference from your kind of mental standpoint and how you focus on it.
Yeah, I think that what you're underscoring is so important. First of all, taking sort of a structured approach to your time. Like I think about my time in blocks. I had to for my job. So that certainly continues, even though I'm no longer practicing as an attorney. But I think more is like taking that step back and really taking inventory of how this, preparation of the food and doing this passion makes you feel in that moment, being present in that moment. This is another question that I really like because I think that there's sort of a misconception, that when we're, creators developing recipes and, publishing cookbooks that, we just put things together, boom, here you go, beautiful dish, right? And, it's really not always that clean of a process. So this question is, did you have to make any notable tweaks to your book's recipes after having people test them in their home kitchens?
This is a great question. There was a very unusual process in my cookbook development and writing process because my timeline was so expedited. So I got my cookbook deal with Simon & Schuster in October of 2020. What is the 2022? Yeah, October of 2020 with the pub date of November 2021. That is very, very short. Most people, like John, how long is how much time do you have for your book right now?
I'll have 2 years total.
Right. That's pretty standard. Like, that's okay. I had basically 8 weeks to be like, Priyanka, you need to write your manuscript and write all your recipes out and get them tested. So what I actually did was I outsourced my recipe testing during my cookbook writing process to help address that question in itself. So I basically put together a list of cooks from people that I know can really cook well, some like chefs down to middle level, down to like people who don't really cook. And I did that intentionally because I was like, I want people who are the chefy types to be excited about this recipe, but easy enough for the non-cooks to make it. So that was kind of my process in doing the cookbook development for the modern tiffin. And it was effective because now that it's out there, I think people, at least the reception and reviews that I've been seeing is that people find it very feasible to make the dishes. And thank God I did that, because I, as one person, probably couldn't, test 55 recipes in the course of 2 weeks. So, I mean, I made my mom make a lot of them too, and she's at the chefy level time, but like, that's kind of how I address that. And I think the outsourcing, if anyone here is like actually looking to write a book, it's a tip that I think you could definitely use in your development.
I would say it is absolutely astonishing how much Priyanka was able to accomplish in that sort of highly unusually truncated period of time. So again, it's just a testament to how well the book came out, notwithstanding those types of limitations. John, are you able to see the Q&A, or do you want me to continue rattling those off? Oh, it looks like you're still. Okay, great. Why don't you take it from here then?
We have one that says, curious if Priyanka always knew that she wanted to be a chef and write a cookbook, or was this something that grew organically throughout her life?
I think the funny thing about me is when I was little, I actually used to give some trouble with eating. Like my mom would sit me and I hope mom's watching, but my mom would sit me first on the dinner table, and I'm the youngest in my family. So I choose sit me first on the dinner table. And there's photos of me just sitting at the dinner table alone. And because I would eat so slow and just chew my food and just keep it in my mouth and just not eat. And we were all wondering how I got so chubby, because we were like, you're not even eating. Like, what are you doing? What's going on? And I would be the last one on the table because she wouldn't let me get up until my plate is cleared, because we don't waste food. So it's funny that I'm now, a chef and do all this stuff because that was me as a child. But I think I've always was obsessed with the process of cooking. I always had like cooking toys, like Barbie kitchens. And I remember distinctly, I had this Indian kitchen set from India, and it just replicated like all the little steel, because we eat with steel plates and cups and dishes a lot. It was like miniature steel dishes. And I was just like obsessed with this set. And I started obsessively watching Food Network and the Martha Stewart show from when I was like 10. So I think I always knew that I liked to cook. I actually looked into going to CIA or Johnson and Wales when I was in high school, but they were like, you're going to have to butcher meat and like eat it. And I was like, nope, not doing any of that, amongst other reasons why I didn't go. So I think we kind of always knew that, I would foray into this industry at some point.
Let's go into the next question. Do you have, this one's asking more about kind of everything that's involved with getting a book deal itself. Do you have an agent or someone that helps you connect with getting onto shows, and do you have any like tips on finding a literary agent, etc.?
I do have a literary agent. She's great. And Andrea, she actually found me. You can, and all of us actually can provide tips on this, but like what I tell people to do if you're starting out is literally, and this is what I did, I Googled how to query an agent. If you write those words, like there are tips and resources on how you can literally query or, pitch yourself to an agent. And the one thing you want to have prepared is your book proposal. They want to be able to see what your book is going to be about, have a sample chapter, have a list of the chapters ready. They want to see your writing style. So there's a lot of work that goes into it before you pitch yourself. But I would recommend doing that. And I have a literary agent. She obviously helps me manage anything related to the book and, getting the book deals and whatnot. But outside of that, I don't have a talent manager or team or anything yet.
That day will come, I'm sure.
This next question, a bit of a broad question. I'm always nervous about cooking the nutrients out of my vegetables. Do you have any tips?
Well, I mean, I'm not a nutritionist and, I'm not a physician or anything. And I am brown, so I do like my vegetables cooked, I must say. I don't really not too into the raw thing. It depends on the dish. But I think it depends, right? Like I don't really question that for myself or with my cooking style, because to be honest, I eat so many vegetables and, just like Joanne and John, the vegan chef. But I eat so many vegetables and I eat a lot of legumes, and also like really underrated, I take my vitamins every single day. And I notice a difference when I don't take my vitamins. Like I do feel a bit more sluggish. So vitamins are underrated. Please take your vitamins. But I don't necessarily, I'm not concerned about that. I mean, obviously, the minute you cook a vegetable, you're depleting some of its nutrients, right? Versus eating it raw. However, there's a lot of vegetables that, and different types of produce that eating it raw is not easily digestible. So it really depends. I just encourage you to do your research. But if you're eating a lot of vegetables and getting enough fibers and proteins and vitamins, like there shouldn't be an issue, in my opinion.
And I would say just one tip, and I'm also not a nutritionist or a professional in any way, but this is one tip that I learned from Michael Greger, Dr. Michael Greger, who I adore. He wrote the book, How Not to Die. And I love that book. And this is like my absolute favorite tip. And it's for cruciferous greens, specifically broccoli and kale. And this is like such a mind-blowing tip. But if you want to retain a lot more of the nutritional value in those cruciferous greens than you otherwise might by cooking them, there are two ways to do it. Number one is to chop them up 35 to 45 minutes in advance of cooking. There's something in the chopping process, and Dr. Greger talks about this, like it's like from the dinosaurs chewing the cruciferous greens, like that's how it evolved, that actually preserves some of that incredibly important cancer-fighting nutrient value in those cruciferous greens if you just chop them up 35 to 45 minutes in advance. The other way to preserve that nutrient value is to add a little bit of mustard powder, which I know is, a wonderful, spice that I'm sure you're very familiar with, Priyanka, to add a little bit of mustard powder to those greens. Again, that will help to preserve some of that nutritional value. I just thought I would add that in there because I love that tip.
Yeah, that 30 to 40 minute thing is very interesting, but also people do that anyway sometimes, because if you prep,
yes,
that makes total sense. Wow.
I know. Random bit of information that I love.
I'm going to be like a health freak after this. I'm just going to go prep.
We have another question. What is your favorite dish from the book, if you can pick just one?
Ooh, my favorite question. My favorite dish is on the cover. It's this one. It's the coconut masala stuffed okra. Okra is my favorite vegetable. It is very underrated. It's my favorite vegetable also because people hate it. And I'm like, you're just not cooking it right. So this is the dish. It's in chapter 1. You should check it out.
And kind of connected, what recipe should I cook first from your book?
The coconut masala stuffed okra. Well, you could cook that, or there's the one that's really popular is in the Italian chapter. It's the bucatini alla pumpkin with pink peppercorn and pistachio. Kelly Clarkson really liked it. So, I'm sure you guys will love it.
Well, that sounds absolutely delightful. I think that we are about out of time, and I definitely wanted to save a couple minutes for you to just this is your last chance to tell everyone why your book is uniquely beautiful and needs to be in their kitchen collection.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you guys so much for joining, and for John and Lara and Joanne for hosting. I think if kind of this session, if you could take away, I guess, any one thing from this session, I think the one thing you can take away is everything that I've learned, that I've experienced, that I talked about, everything that I'm truly, really into and passionate about is in this book. So if you never get a chance to meet me personally, which I hope we can all meet one day, like, you can meet me through the book, right? Like I am literally in the book. The way I'm talking right now is the way I talk in the book. And I think for a lot of us who have grown up in this country and in environments that didn't look like us, and it may have been a challenge growing up because of the way we look or speak or what we eat, I think now that we have the ability to share our stories and our food, for that one reason, I think it's so important to expand your library of recipes with things that maybe you've never tried before, and to also indulge in those stories while you're at it. So those would be my 2 reasons for why you should get the modern TIFFIN, and then go get a TIFFIN because they're so cute.
Totally. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Joanne and John, for hosting. And thank you, Priyanka, for joining us as well. Congratulations on your amazing book. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As I mentioned at the beginning, we recorded today, and it'll be on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. And thank you, everyone, again for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great evening. Bye.